Hey, everybody. Welcome to Adapter Parish, episode 96, Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. This has been one of our most frequently requested episodes, and I'm so happy that we're finally bringing it to you today. But before we journey to Manderley with Maxim and the second Mrs. De Winter, let's talk about our next episode. We've got something big we're working on for the 3 episodes leading up to episode 100, so think of our next as a light app. In 2 weeks, we'll be moving into the town of Stepford, where something funny is going on with all the wives. We'll be discussing Ira Levin's original 1972 satirical science fiction thriller, The Stepford Wives, the 1975 movie adaptation starring Catherine Ross, and the 2004 Nicole Kidman remake. That'll be out in 2 weeks on Tuesday, July 27th. And after that, like I said, we've got something big we're working on, and we can't wait to share it with you. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections about today's episode or any others that you'd like to hear on the show, remember to email adapterparishcast@gmail.com. If you enjoy the show, we'd love it if you would share that with the world by leaving a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. We're also on Patreon at patreon.com/adaptcast. We've got a patron-only community and our bi-weekly bonus show, Adapter Parish Plus, with episodes releasing every Tuesday between episodes of this show. We hope you check it out. Show notes from this and all other episodes can be found at adapterparishcast.com. And with that, on with the show, Adapter Parish, episode 96, Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. Hello and welcome to Adapter Parish, a podcast about adaptation. I'm Jeremy Latour.
And I'm Ari Lipshaw, and today we are talking about Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca.
I don't want to.
Why don't you want to?
I don't want to do it.
Why?
I don't want to do it because it's too much pressure.
Is it too much pressure? This is our, I think I say without fear of exaggeration, I actually do think this is our most requested episode, like maybe ever.
Like, if people request Emma,
Yeah.
I knew about Emma.
Yeah.
I knew what Emma was about. I already had an idea of what that was. I knew how big that was.
Yeah.
But like Rebecca,
I will say
didn't-
no one requested Wuthering Heights. We just did that. We just did that of our own accord.
we felt like we needed to.
Yeah.
And
To
we,
complete the canon.
Yeah. This was the thing that like I knew nothing about Rebecca. I managed to avoid it for years. It was always just this thing. And all I knew is that everyone was asking for it all the time.
And you were saying, like, what is this Rebecca that I keep hearing about? And I kept saying, oh, yeah, it's a book. I really want to do it for the podcast. And you were like, okay, good.
Like, I knew it was a book and I
Yeah.
knew it was a Hitchcock movie, but I didn't know. I knew there was like a new one that came out last year.
Yeah.
Like, I knew these things. I just didn't know anything about it.
Yeah.
And everyone's asking for it. And on top of all of that, I feel like I'm going to have, I don't want to speak for you. I feel like I'm going to have 1 or 2 opinions in this episode that might like upset people.
Oh,
and
no.
I don't want to upset people.
You mean about the actual adaptations or just
Yeah.
about Rebecca?
No, like about the actual adaptations and no, not really about Rebecca, but
Yeah.
like about the adaptations.
Because I want to put this out there right away because we had a couple people say that they were worried about this. We really liked the book Rebecca and we really enjoyed doing this episode. This was not a
super
slog.
fun.
This was not a slog in the way that Wuthering Heights was, that we like basically didn't like anything and the book was really dismal. I had read Rebecca before and I kind of forgot that it speeds up in the second half. So like it took me a while to get through the first half and then things took a turn.
Well, it's cool the way. First of all, let's back up for a second.
Yeah.
So what is this about? I know I'm not speaking to anybody right now because I feel like I was the last person to find out what Rebecca was actually about.
I mean, of our audience base, yes, probably yes.
Probably, but how about we do a back of the book?
Okay.
And then we can just kind of move on from there. Does
All
that
right.
sound okay to you?
That sounds fine.
Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again. The novel begins in Monte Carlo, where our heroine is swept off her feet by the dashing widower Maxim de Winter and his sudden proposal of marriage. Orphaned and working as a lady's maid, she can barely believe her luck. It is only when they arrive at his massive country estate that she realizes how large a shadow his late wife will cast over their lives, presenting her with a lingering evil that threatens to destroy their marriage from beyond the grave. First published in 1938, this classic Gothic novel is such a compelling read that it won the Anthony Award for Best Novel of the Century.
Wow, that's a lot to live up to.
That might be more than I think it deserves personally, but I'm just this jackass with the show.
Yeah.
Like I'm nobody. people who are more important and I would assume smarter than me say that it's better than I think it is. So I guess I have to accept that.
Sure.
But it was fun.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that's a pretty good summary. It leaves out, some nuance. It leaves out
One of the main
one of the
characters.
main characters, arguably like the main character.
Yeah. Spoiler alert for all of them. We're gonna spoil everything.
To be very clear, about who's who, because I think sometimes people who haven't read Rebecca, like this is like the classic thing, like who's buried in Grant's tomb, like who's the book Rebecca about? It's sort of about Rebecca, but she's dead before the book begins. She is not the main character, other than like sort of in spirit. Famously, our narrator is famously unnamed.
Not famous enough that I knew that.
Yeah, well, famous in the context again of people that know something about this book.
They knew something, and full stop.
I actually Googled it because there's an exchange at the beginning, and it's really funny because this is the exact type of thing that you can do in a book that you can't do in a movie, because you can elide and obfuscate in a book more than you can in a movie, because you can kind of skip over things, whereas in a movie you sort of have to show at least chunks of natural conversation. Because in the book, when she first meets Maxim de Winter and they're having a conversation, he says to her, "I really like your first name. It's very unusual. Who came up with that?" And she says, "Oh, my father, he was an artist. He was a really wonderful and unusual person." And then they go off into a conversation about her father. And if you had that scene in a movie, you'd just be sitting there going like, wait, what's her name? Did I miss something?
It would bother you the entire time.
It would bother you the entire time. And also, like, there would have to be a point that, like, she tells him her name. It's just is very strange. So I actually Googled, like, is there some accepted understanding of what her name is supposed to be? Like,
kind of like Offred in Handmaid's Tale, how
Yeah.
like people generally accept that her name is June,
Yes.
even though it's never stated in the book.
Correct. There is not. I could not find any
Yeah.
indication of what because I'm very curious of what her like what is her unusual and beautiful name supposed to be. And I think I actually even did find a quote from Daphne du Maurier, I think, saying like, I don't know. I couldn't think of a name that was good enough, so I just left it out. Like that was what she said.
I buy that.
I buy it too. Like it's one of those things that I think you can read a lot more into than, maybe perhaps the author intended. Like,
I just feel like if you're making a movie or a TV show, there are so many examples of main characters who are unnamed. There's tons of them, and I feel like with most of them, you get to the end and you like someone points out to you, did you notice they never actually had a name?
yeah.
Like, and it's always a surprise. Those
Yeah.
are the good ones, right?
Yeah.
But then on the other side of it, so I'm thinking about the witches.
I was
feel
thinking
like
the same thing. Yeah, he doesn't have a name.
there are like 3 different ways to handle it. One of them is keep them with no name, but handle it well. Like distract from it, make sure the plot is moving along at a good pace. Don't draw attention to it, and hope that when the audience gets to the end, they won't have noticed that they don't have a name.
Yeah.
Which is how most of the good versions of that go.
Yeah.
And honestly, every version of Rebecca that we watched,
That's what I was going to say.
none of them really bothered me
I
that
feel
she
like-
doesn't have a name.
Yeah, I feel like every version, none of them that I can think of, like hung a lantern on the fact that
Yeah.
she didn't have a name.
But The Witches is a great example of kind of the 2 ways to sit on opposite sides of
That's
that.
right.
Because one way to do it is just say, fuck it.
Your
They-
name's Luke.
Yeah. Her name's Daphne,
Yeah.
which won't be weird to anybody.
Yeah.
We're going to name her Daphne de Winter,
Yeah.
and based on the book by Daphne du Maurier, which is what the Old Witches does.
Yeah.
By the way, quick, I'm gonna relate this back to our Daphne here. The original Witches, directed by Nicholas Roeg, who also did Don't Look Now,
Mhm.
which is a kind of a classic horror movie based on a short story by Daphne du Maurier.
It's just
I'm
such
just saying.
it's a small world.
But then the other way they handle it is the way the new Witches handled it, which is, oh no, we're going to make sure that he doesn't have a name, but we're going to put a scene in where he meets another kid and the other kid says, hello, my name is Bruno. And it is so conspicuous that the other kid doesn't go, hello, my name is whatever.
Or the part where the grandmother comes in and is like, "Is that you, my grandson?"
Right?
Yeah.
Doesn't work.
It doesn't work. Okay, anyway, let's stop talking about the witches.
But all of the versions of Rebecca seem to work.
Yeah. So we have our young, unnamed heroine. She is working as a paid ladies' companion for a Mrs. Van Hopper, and they are traveling and they're staying at this hotel in Monte Carlo, but it is the off season, so nobody important is there. Until one day, the mysterious and grieving Maximilian de Winter, Maxim to his close friends, shows up at the hotel. And Mrs. Van Hopper is very much a snob, and she wants to get in with this guy, and she tells the story of how his wife tragically died like a year before. And she then takes ill, and this our young heroine, God, we have to just figure out what to call her.
Mrs. De Winter.
Mrs. De Winter. Well, she's not Mrs. De Winter at the point that I'm talking about, but yes.
Okay.
The Mrs. De Winter to be, spoiler alert, they get married, is thrown into his companionship. They take walks together and go for drives, and like they enjoy each other's company. And then she, being young and romantic, fancies herself in love with him. One day, Mrs. Van Hopper's like, that's it. We're leaving. We're going back to New York. And he's like, listen, do you want to get married? And she's like, yes, that would be fine. So they get married in Monte Carlo. It's a very hurried affair. There is a great disparity between their ages. He's been married before. Yeah.
What is the great disparity between their ages? Are their ages ever stated explicitly in the book? Because if they are, I don't remember.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think hers is, but like she's in her early 20s. Like I think that's very clear. She talks about like the general sense of her age. And he is, I think he's over 40. They definitely allude to the fact that he's like 20 years older than her.
Okay.
So that's what I say would be the canonical disparity in their age. Okay.
Canonically, it's ambiguous, you're saying.
There is a canonical just about 20-year gap between them. I don't think that's like in dispute from the text, I guess is what I'm saying.
That's fair.
Okay. And I guess not to get too personal here, but I will just say that I probably had a certain reaction to this particular plot line and the depictions of this vaguely predatory relationship. I won't say predatory, I'll say unbalanced relationship between this much older, much wealthier man with a lot of status and position in the world and this young woman that didn't have any of that, based on some personal experiences that I have had. And I won't go into too much more detail than that. Okay. So just for everyone's knowledge about where my biases are coming from as we continue with this conversation.
Except you're not going to go into it, so they don't really have any knowledge.
Well, I'm alluding to it.
Okay.
I'm alluding to a thing. So, okay, do you want me to keep going, or do you want to take it? Sometimes you don't sometimes you don't like my plot summary, so I'm allowing you to pick it up.
I always enjoy your plot summaries. My only criticism is the length.
Yeah, I understand that.
That's it. That's
okay.
all it is.
All right, go ahead. So they're married now.
I'm just saying we are over 10 minutes into this episode and we have not yet mentioned Mrs. Danvers.
Well, here we're about to. So go ahead.
They both get to Manderley. They meet all the people who work there, including Mrs. Danvers, who is in charge of the entire estate.
She's the housekeeper.
And boy, she's just a peach. She's just the best. She is so sweet. She is so loving. She's none of those things.
She's not.
She's the worst. She is described as looking like a skeleton.
Yep.
And being mean. That's essentially what she is in the book.
Yeah.
And she's very mean to this lady and hates her. We don't know why. We really only know two things. One, she hates the new Mrs. De Winter, and two, she loved Rebecca.
Well, the two things that go arm in arm.
It seems like they're related.
Well, at one point, so Maxim has a sister B who's an important character, and
B's the best.
And when the new Mrs. De Winter meets B for the first time, B says, I assume Mrs. Danvers is being really mean to you, or some words to that effect.
Yeah.
And the second Mrs. De Winter is like, kind of, why? And B was like, oh, I'm surprised no one told you she adored Rebecca. And we're given that piece of information through B. Also kind of slightly implied that B, unlike apparently everyone else in the world, did not necessarily adore Rebecca.
Yeah.
There is this understanding that Rebecca was perfect. She's the most perfect, the most beautiful. Everyone loved her. So charming, so talented. But it does seem that there's this air that the people that were closest to her maybe felt slightly different.
Yeah.
Because there's another character that we haven't met yet, Frank Crawley.
Well, he's Frank's complicated.
Yeah.
So he is, well, what is he? He's the executor of the estate.
Yeah, he's like the manager of the estate.
Yeah.
So he's
works. Max's lawyer.
He's
essentially.
Max's. Yeah, he's Max's like. Well, I would call him like his COO.
Sure.
Like,
yeah. If we want to look at it through that lens.
Yes, he runs the business for him, the business of having an estate.
Mm-hmm. I guess, like, I don't know what's important at this point, because the people who are listening to this know, you either know or you don't know. So for those of you that don't know, let's just get right to it. Rebecca was a goddamn sociopath.
Yeah.
And Max hated her, and he killed her.
Yeah. The official word is that she drowned when her boat sank one night in a storm. She was out sailing.
But that's not what happened.
That's not what happened.
He shot her, and then he put her body in the boat, and then he sunk the boat. and then another woman washed up like miles upshore, and he went and identified the body as Rebecca.
Yes.
But that was not true because, as I said, he murdered her, and she is still in the boat.
Yeah.
And then a big thing happens that, like, we're not even talking about, like, the new Mrs. De Winter because we need to spend a lot of time talking about her.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just throw this out there. One of my only criticisms, even saying it as a criticism is a little harsh. One of my observations is that the plot doesn't really hinge on the second Mrs. De Winter that much.
Yeah.
The plot seems to barrel on ahead whether she wants to or not, with or without her interaction.
Yeah.
So, like, for example, another ship gets into a bit of a pickle out in the bay. And when they're rescuing that ship, the diver goes down, finds the boat, looks in, and there's a body.
Yeah.
And so they figure out that it's actually Rebecca, and then there has to be an inquest, and Maxim has to, go to that, and there's this cops involved and detectives and all kinds of different things, and he's being blackmailed for the murder, which he did commit, but but
the person that is blackmailing him doesn't necessarily know that. He just strongly suspects.
Right. So it's all these things. The second Mrs. Winter has like very little to do with any of this stuff. She's on her own emotional journey that's kind of running in parallel to the plot of to the actual story.
Yeah.
Again, just an observation, not a criticism. We're going to get back to her. But bottom line, what they find out is that it turned out she was riddled with cancer. Absolutely riddled with cancer.
Rebecca
was. And essentially, it's not Maxim's suspicion is that she goaded him into killing her because she didn't want to go through extremely painful death from cancer.
Yes, but what he thinks is that what he has believed for the last year is that on the last night of her life, she came to him and said, "Guess what? I'm pregnant with someone else's baby," because she's been sleeping with everyone. She's been everybody. Strong implication for me, people of all genders. Some of the adaptations we watched tried to be like men, of course, all men. I don't know that was necessarily implied in the book. But anyway, certainly some people she's been sleeping with had the ability to make her pregnant. What Max thinks is that she came to him and said, "I'm pregnant. I'm going to be the perfect mother, just like I've been the perfect wife on the surface. Nobody will ever know this crazy life I lead. No one's ever going to know or suspect that this baby isn't yours. And it'll be such a great joke on you to see like someone else's kid growing up and inheriting this estate. Ha ha ha, Max, you're in for it now." And she provokes him, and he shoots her, and then, as you mentioned, hides the body and everything.
But what they eventually rule, because they find out about the cancer, they rule that it was suicide, and she scuttled her own ship and drowned herself.
Yes.
Which is not what happened, because he did a murder.
Yeah.
But here's the thing that Du Maurier does, and lots of people have done this thing, where we as an audience know that Max did a bad thing, but we're also on his side, and we don't want him to get caught.
Well, because the person, Du Maurier does a really interesting thing here, which is that he's being blackmailed, right, for murder.
Which he did.
Which he did do. So ordinarily you would think, yeah, you want this person to be caught. But the person who's blackmailing him and accusing him of the murder is
worse than him.
Is worse. So it's like, oh no, I don't want Favell to win.
Jack Favell is a piece of shit.
Rebecca's cousin, who believes that he was the father of
cousins
of the putative baby who actually did not exist. It's all very complicated.
It's not that complicated.
It's not that complicated. I mean, many shades of Jane Eyre. I would say the plot.
Yeah.
The plot is basically if Jane Eyre were set in the 1930s, like what would that maybe look like? A young woman working in a domestic type of environment. There's an older man that she falls in love with. They are together. He has a dark secret involving his wife, who's not there, but sort of there. And then a house burns down at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jane Eyre. Okay. So is there anything else in the plot that we need to cover before we move on to the adaptations?
In the plot?
Yes.
Kind of, not really.
Okay.
But there are two things I want to talk about before we move on from the book. One, I really want to talk about the second Mrs. De Winter.
Yeah.
And what kind of main character she is. But the second thing I want to talk about is whether this book is good, whether we enjoyed it. So let's talk about her first.
Okay.
I was scared at first that the thing that was happening was basically the Twilight thing.
Mm-hmm.
Who wrote Twilight? What's her name? Stephanie Meyer?
Stephanie Meyer?
The whole thing about the way that the main character is described is she's not really described at all.
Yeah.
Which is this kind of inadvertently allowed any like young tween girl reading it to identify as the main character.
Yeah, it's this like weird semi-Brechtian thing where you can project yourself into this, maybe like the opposite of Brechtian. I don't know.
I don't know what that is.
I don't know what that is, that like the main character is so nothing that like on purpose to allow you to inject yourself into the shoes of this person. Anyway, I'm so sorry.
But that's the thing. Like, I feel like the main character, what's her name in the Twilight books? Doesn't matter.
Bella?
Bella, yeah, it's Bella. So the whole thing about Bella in the Twilight books is that I think she's kind of inadvertently a nothing character.
Yeah.
Which luckily allowed people to identify with her.
Sure.
And that was what I was worried this was at first. Because again, no prior expectations. I didn't know what to expect with this. So I'm reading it and I'm going, all I know about her is that she is very nervous and very unsure of herself and constantly is hiding things and has massive inferiority complex and massive imposter syndrome, which I didn't identify with at all. That's certainly nothing that is crippling for me in my adult life.
No.
So I found myself identifying with her and I'm going like, am I supposed to identify with her this much? Is this on purpose? And by the time I got about halfway through the book, I kind of made the decision, and it seems like other people have made this decision too, that yes, it is on purpose.
Yeah.
And the thing that separates something like Rebecca from something like Twilight is that Daphne du Maurier knew what she was doing.
Sure.
In that regard.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I think is really interesting about this character, now that we're on the subject, is like, you know how sometimes you discover like a hidden talent? Like, you sort of
like someone else's hidden talent or one of your own hidden talents?
No, one of your own. Like you sort of are in a situation, like especially like some sort of crisis, and you're like, wow, I'm really level-headed in a crisis. Like I didn't even really know that I was that way.
Yeah.
But wow, this is cool. I have now a newfound confidence that I know I can handle a bad situation.
Hang on. Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
Can I put something out there?
Sure.
How does she react to accidentally breaking like a piece of china?
Oh, she like fully freaks out and she hides the evidence and she doesn't tell anyone and she's so nervous about it and she just kind of panics and she just kind of like freezes and panics.
Okay.
Like she can't handle it.
Okay, counterpoint.
Yeah.
How does she react to finding out that her husband fucking murdered his ex-wife?
Okay, don't say anything to the police. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to do this and then we're going to do this and then you're going to do this and don't say this, but you should say this and I'm going to do this and I'm going to grab this and we're going to do this and here's what's going to happen. Do it now.
She's the best.
Yes.
Once she finds out about the murder, she grows up and she's great.
Yes.
And I do think that's on purpose.
Yes.
I think du Maurier's doing that on purpose.
She has a talent for covering up murder.
I kind of loved her at that point.
Yeah.
But I liked her already. I was already identifying with her. Like she's an empathy machine.
Yeah.
Because everything that's happening to her, you can't but empathize with her the entire time. Like, here's the thing. The thing we haven't talked about is like one of the most awkward things I have ever read in any book ever. Can I describe the costume ball very briefly?
Of course.
They're going to have this big costume ball that Manderley always has, and she can't think of what to do. And she and Mrs. Danvers they've had it out, and she can tell that Mrs. Danvers doesn't like her, and Mrs. Danvers talks about how much she loved Rebecca and how she'll never replace her, blah, 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 blah. And Mrs. Danvers comes to her and suddenly is like really cool. It's real nice, real chill. And she thinks maybe she does want to be friends with me. Maybe this is okay. And she kind of confides in her that she can't come up with, what to wear to the ball. And Miss Danvers goes, well, there's all these portraits in the gallery. Maybe you could dress up as one of them. And she goes, oh, that's a real good idea, Danvers. That's really good. Anyone in particular? No, she doesn't ask that. Mrs. Danvers volunteers like, there is Lady Caroline de Winter.
That one's Mr. de Winter's favorite.
Yeah,
I've often heard him say so.
Beautiful white dress and
Not
everything.
telling you what to do, but it is his favorite.
And she goes, man, I actually do love that painting. That's a really great idea. We're friends now. Goodbye. She does all of this stuff. She keeps the entire thing a secret from Maxim and everybody because she wants it to be a big surprise. And she goes down to the party and she walks out and she goes to one of the members of the band playing at the party and it wouldn't be as bad if she didn't tell someone to announce her as Miss Caroline de Winter.
It's really cringy.
Or the Lady Caroline de Winter.
Yeah.
And she walks out and all the air gets sucked out of the room because the thing she doesn't know is that Rebecca dressed up as that at the last ball before she died.
Like exactly 1 year ago.
And Maxim understandably freaks out and yells at her. She doesn't know why. I didn't go back to check on this, but I just remember that there is a moment where she looks and Mrs. Danvers is looking out a doorway at her after this has all happened, and she's got a smirk on her face, and she doesn't know how, but Mrs. Danvers screwed her.
Yeah.
She doesn't know how, but she knows she did it.
Yeah.
And then she finds out everything about Rebecca.
Yeah.
So this is like the most awkward thing. So up until this moment, I've been empathizing with her like crazy, and this put it over the edge.
Yeah.
My heart went out to her. I wanted to step into the book and give her a hug and tell her everything was going to be okay.
Yes.
And also be her and have someone hug me and tell me that everything was going to be okay. Because every awkward, awful thing I've ever done was coming back to me in that moment. I'm just saying it's an empathy machine.
Yeah.
The middle of this book is an empathy machine.
Yeah.
It's chapter 14, I think,
Yeah.
is where it happens.
Well, it's true. And then, the thing that really, really helps push this along is, again, as I was saying, like when Maxim gives her this confession, which is, by the way, like the next day, like after things happen pretty fast after this costume
the
ball.
whole first half of the book is like kind of meandering and takes a long time for anything to happen, and it takes place over a long course of time. But then the second half of the book is like a week.
Yeah. So like the costume ball happens. It goes into the wee hours of the night. The next morning is when this boat crashes.
Yeah.
And by the next afternoon, they found the body. So like less than 24 hours later, Maxim is giving her this confession that I knew the body was in the boat because I put it there because I killed Rebecca. I shot her. I put her in the boat. And
I did
the thing.
a murder.
And it has the effect of putting her and Maxim on sort of a more equal footing, right? Because it makes him much more powerless because he doesn't know what to do. He feels like he's been beaten, like, right? Like he thinks this is the end of his story. He's like, this is it. We're never destined to be happy. You thought we were at cross purposes this whole time. You thought I didn't love you because I still loved Rebecca. I love you desperately, but I always knew I had this hanging over our heads, but now it's too late. And she's like, it is not too late, and I'm going to tell you why.
It's amazing in that scene too that like the entire time he's telling her I did this and I did this and I killed her and I put the body, and she's listening and not really reacting to it, and then he says, I didn't love her, I hated her. And that's the thing that makes her go,
she's like, oh, okay, well, this is all going to be fine then.
Yeah, this is going to be fine because you love me and you didn't love her and everything's okay.
Yeah, but as I say, it makes them more like equals. It makes her more powerful. It makes him less powerful. Then they are able to come together on terms of more equality, I think.
Yeah.
And that is how they then proceed. Okay, so we've talked about the new Mrs. De Winter. You had a second thing that you wanted
I just want to talk about the book in general.
Yeah.
Because I ended up really enjoying it. Like, how many times in the years that we've been doing the show have you watched me like not willing to put a book down?
Once or twice.
Once or twice.
Yeah.
This was one of them.
Yeah.
Because once the second half of the book happens, boy, it's a page turner.
Yeah.
The entire first half of the book, I'm thinking like, is this just a romance? Because if it is just a romance, it's not grabbing me the way that it should, because he's a lot older than her and he's kind of an asshole to her. And I think she could do better, but also maybe she can't. I don't know. It's not really doing anything for me.
Yeah.
Then the costume ball happens, and then suddenly it's like kicks into overdrive, and just plot happens and plot happens and plot happens. And the thing that's so great, and now that I've read it and now I'm like seeing what other people have been saying about it, I don't want us to finish without acknowledging the fact that like du Maurier crafted this incredible like Russian nesting doll of a book.
Yeah.
Like Russian nesting doll maybe isn't even the best metaphor, but like it's this thing where for the first half of the book, you think it's this like gothic romance. Then for the next quarter of the book, you think it's this like murder mystery.
Mm-hmm.
Then for the end of it, it's basically like, it's essentially Poirot at that point.
Yeah.
Where we have this new guy, Colonel Julian, who is the magistrate?
Yeah, the magistrate, I think.
For the district.
Yeah, who can say?
I don't know what words
He's
are
like
right to use for all
a detective and
of this.
also a magistrate. I don't really know.
But he comes in and he kind of takes over as the main character for the last quarter of the book, which I've kind of gone back and forth about. I know I always talk about like whether something is a feature or a bug. To me, emotionally, it feels like a bug because I love the second Mrs. De Winter.
Yeah.
And she kind of disappears in the last quarter of the book.
Yeah.
Even though she's narrating everything, she's not active. She's not doing anything. She's just telling you, and then this person said this to this person. No one said anything to me. They only said things to each other.
Yeah.
And then everything was fine by the end,
Yeah.
except Manderley is burning down because Danvers is burning it down. Because she's basically Milton in Office Space. Yeah. He set the building on fire.
Or the old Mrs. Rochester.
Yeah. So like my two big things with it were like, the romance isn't really doing it for me as much as I think it should be, and she kind of disappears in the last quarter of the book. But that's not necessarily a bug. Like, this is the way du Maurier wrote it.
Yeah.
And she seems like she knew what she was doing.
Yeah. The last quarter of the book, you could imagine that if there were a spin-off called the Colonel Julian Mysteries.
Yes.
Like this is the beginning of the thing, where he's called in because there's this kerfuffle.
Mm-hmm.
You hear the whole story in flashback, and now he's like, all right, now we need to find out who this doctor is. Let's go to London,
Yeah.
Which we're going to talk about We're going to talk about detectives in a minute.
Yeah.
Okay. I see by the clock we probably need to move on to talking about the adaptations.
We should.
Okay.
In 1940, a young director, young whippersnapper, he wasn't that young, named Alfred Hitchcock made a movie of Rebecca, and apparently a lot of people have seen it and they love it. It's Hitchcock's Rebecca.
Yeah.
Like it was his first American production. It was his first working with David O. Selznick. Apparently, like O. Selznick really put himself into the production of it and like did the editing, like was in the editing room every single day. I don't know how Hitchcock felt about that. But anyway, this isn't our first time doing Hitchcock for this show. So can I just give my quick little Hitchcock thing?
Sure.
I think Hitchcock is fine. I think he deserves a lot of credit for a lot of the things he came up with technically. I have never personally responded to his movies that much because I think we just share different values. And I don't think he cares about like character and motivation that much. I think he cares more about plot. And usually there's, in like every Hitchcock movie, there's like a big thing that happens at the end, and there's like a machination of the plot or a set piece that like is clearly the thing he wanted to do, but it almost never, I don't respond to them that much.
Yeah,
so
I
like
mean,
Hitchcock is good, but I don't love Hitchcock.
That's why I love the TV show so much, like what is it, the Alfred Hitchcock Mysteries or whatever.
Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
Alfred Hitchcock Presents, because each episode is only 25 minutes or
Yeah.
whatever. So like you don't have to, there is a twist ending, but you don't have to sit through like 2 hours of plot to get there. You just get to have the fun of like these little short vignette Alfred Hitchcock style. And I think they're really great. There's so many seasons of it. It's really good. And it's funny because a lot of the actors in it are recurring both within the show and like in his movies, so you recognize people a lot. So
directed by Alfred Hitchcock, written by Robert E. Sherwood, Joan Harrison, Philip McDonald, and Michael Hogan.
Yes.
Starring Joan Fontaine as the second Mrs. De Winter.
Shades of Jane Eyre once again. Yeah. Once again, we are asked to believe that Joan Fontaine is mousy and unattractive and shy.
Now, at the time, Jane Eyre hadn't come out yet.
Yeah.
This was the first time that people were asked to be doing that. She was 23 at the time.
Yes.
And also Laurence Olivier plays Maxim. And other people. Judith Anderson plays Mrs. Danvers, and maybe we'll mention the other people that are in the cast. But so let's acknowledge, is Joan Fontaine one of the most beautiful actresses that have ever been in movies?
Yes.
Okay. Did she work for you in this?
Yes.
Why? Because she worked for me too.
Because she's a good actor.
Right? But she didn't work for me as Jane Eyre.
Yeah, no, she didn't. Well, I don't think she... I don't know. Something about that movie didn't work super well. It was because she's modern. Like, she's very modern. So this worked really well because she was acting a cute, young, modern 23-year-old young lady.
Which is different than like a really shy like 18-year-old.
Yeah, in 1840.
She's 23 playing like approximately 23, not 25 playing 18.
Yeah, I mean that you have to kind of remember that like the 1940 version of this was not a period piece. Like it was written like 2 years before. Yeah. Like this was contemporary. So she's playing, I mean it's
By the way, it was adapted as a play in 39 by Du Maurier.
Yeah.
Which like I just want to mention we're a show about adaptation. She adapted her own book as a play, but like we're not talking about it. I just want to mention it.
Well, I just think it bears remembering that this is Julia Roberts in Eat, Pray, Love. You know what I mean? This is a modern movie star playing a modern character in a film that's set today.
Why did you go with Eat, Pray, Love?
I don't know. I was thinking of someone that doesn't do a lot of period pieces, and I hit upon Julia Roberts.
Okay. Mary Riley would disagree with you.
Yes. Well, you'll notice I said not a lot, not
That's
never.
Fair.
Okay.
That's fair.
No, I don't know why I chose Eat, Pray, Love. It was in my mind.
Pretty Woman, you would think.
But my point is, Pretty Woman would be a good one. My point is, my point is that I think in 2021, you and I think of an adaptation of Rebecca as being such a period piece, right? It's set in a period. It's from a long time ago, but this was a modern film set today. And so she's just playing herself. She's playing a young modern lady. And I think it really works, and I think she does a great job. And frankly, I think the two of them have pretty good chemistry.
Pretty great chemistry.
Yeah,
this is one of the best things I can say about this one is that these are two actors, Joan Fontaine and Laurence Olivier, that we have fairly recently talked about being miscast.
Yeah.
They're not miscast in this.
No, Olivier's so good in
They're
this.
cast incredibly well in this. Like, Fontaine she's great as Mrs. De Winter, and he's pretty great as Maxim.
He's genuinely perfect. Like, I don't know who in 1940 you cast in this role, if not not Laurence Olivier. Like, I think last time we talked about him, I actually said, I mean, he's perfect for Rebecca. He's just miscast. And it was Wuthering Heights, obviously.
Yeah.
My God, this is all tied together. And not for nothing, I think to complete the trio, I think Judith Anderson is also perfect.
Yeah.
Like, again, famously, I don't think this is a hot take. I think, like, famously, this is a movie that people love, and they think that these three leads are perfect and play these roles perfectly. And I don't necessarily disagree. I don't disagree at all. I think they're perfect.
I think there is, I want to draw a distinction between thinking that someone is perfect for something and thinking that someone is like defining the role.
Yeah.
And that's where I run into trouble with this one, because I agree that Fontaine and Olivier and Anderson are perfect for these parts, but just because they're perfect for it doesn't mean that other people aren't also perfect for it or good in it. And I know that's not what you're saying.
Nope, it's not.
No, but I'm planting this seed because when we're going to get to some other ones later where a criticism I keep seeing is, well, this actor isn't Laurence Olivier.
Yes, and this is something we run into with adaptations. I don't know that we've run into it in a while, because I don't know that we've done something so iconic in a while, but like it is definitely something that we see sometimes as far as criticism goes, and that I think neither you nor I respond to very positively.
No.
That somebody's like, well, this isn't good because it's not as good as such and such. It's like, we've talked about this before. There is room in the world for multiple really good adaptations of a thing. We always want something to be good. When we sit down in front of it, we want it, best of all, it's really good and we really enjoy it. B, it's batshit crazy and we can make fun of it. That's the second best scenario. Third best is like, it's just kind of okay, because then it gets boring, right? Then if there's too many of them, it gets boring.
Yeah, but this is something I've talked about in like as far as the relationship between theater and film goes.
Yeah,
that like film is this permanent thing. You create a film and it endures for years, and people get this bug up their ass that, oh well, just because this film exists, why would anyone ever remake it? Because anytime we want, we can go back and watch this original one. No one thinks about that in the theater. When you do, like in theater, you always want to do a new Hamlet.
Yeah.
There's always a version of Hamlet being performed. No one ever says, well, I don't know if people say this, like, why would anyone ever play Hamlet after Olivier did it? Like, that's not how theater works.
No, and in fact, like, you know, even not even necessarily production to production, but performance to performance.
Yeah.
Like, you know, people say, you know, part of the point of live theater is it's always different night after night. It's a living art. The actors are finding new things in it the more they perform, and it's different every night that you go. And so, yeah, I think it is really different in theater versus film. You don't have, quote, new productions of things necessarily. You know, and we've talked about this before. Why don't people remake exact screenplays very often? They usually don't.
Well, I mean, speaking of Hitchcock, like this is one of the few times where that does happen, because they remade, like Gus Van Sant remade Psycho,
right.
But like
famously bad,
shot for shot, and it's not even bad. It's just nothing.
Yeah,
it's a film school experiment. It's not. It doesn't stand on its own merits. It doesn't stand. If you had never seen the original and didn't know it existed, and someone said, "Hey, you should watch this new movie, Psycho," you would go, "This is a weird movie, and it's like not great."
Yeah,
but the original is classic because context matters.
Yes,
I guess I just want to bring it back to my original argument, which is I'm not saying you're wrong if you say this, but if you're the type of person who says, if you look at something and go, well, this person isn't Laurence Olivier, and that you feel that that's a genuine criticism, I disagree that is a really strong, genuine criticism, and I would love to hash it out and argue with you about it.
Well, you know, I feel like we've spent a lot of time sort of getting defensive about liking.
Let's back up.
Let's actually talk about this particular version.
It's really good.
It's really good. I mean, I think one thing I do want to talk about is like, so you talked about your like sort of visceral reaction to the costume scene, and like that's what got you. I think the thing that gets me every time I watch it is like what I sort of am calling like the big mistake that our heroine makes with Mrs. Danvers.
Yeah.
And it makes me so uncomfortable every time, because it's like watching a slow motion car crash. It's like, no, you're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. Just no, do the thing that I would do, and it would be so much better.
Yeah.
And they play it so well in this, because I think the contrast between the two actors is so good. Like Joan Fontaine is so young and so innocent. And I love the part where and this is from the book, where she's like, Mrs. Danvers, I just want us to be friends, and I really want this to be a success. And I really am going to lean on you for help here, because I know you know what you're doing and I don't. It's like, no, you don't understand. She is the servant. You need to control her or she will walk all over you. But the sort of fatal mistake that she makes is she comes in and she's so she's so intimidated, right, by Mrs. Danvers. So everything is like, no, whatever you think is best, Mrs. Danvers, whatever you think is best. And she's just so A, that, and B, she's so haunted by shades of Rebecca. Like, she's using her stationery and everything is monogrammed in her sheets and her hairbrush, and like everything is hers. All the things that were hers. And Mrs. Danvers resents her for it, because she says at the end to her, how do you think it made me feel that I saw you like using her things? Like her, I loved her and I loved those things, and she was so proud of them, and her address book and her menu book and like all of her papers and everything that was hers. The biggest mistake that she makes is not coming in on day one and saying, oh, Mrs. Danvers, I think there's been some mistake. This is not my monogram. This is Rebecca's monogram. Please take these things away and have my new things brought,
The thing I kept coming back to when I was reading it and watching all of these is I just wanted her to say, I just want to be clear, there is a new rule in this house, is that if you are ever to refer to the former Mrs. De Winter, you are to call her either Rebecca De Winter, the former Mrs. De Winter, the prior Mrs. De Winter,
the late Mrs. De Winter.
The late Mrs. De Winter. If you ever refer to Mrs. De Winter,
you're talking about
me.
Yeah.
Let's be clear.
Let's be clear. Yeah, totally. And there is this great scene in the Hitchcock version that does happen in the book, but like in a different spot.
Yeah.
There's a point that she looks Mrs. Danvers in the eye and says, I am Mrs. De Winter now. But it's like too little too late. Like it only serves to like add fuel to the fire of Mrs. Danvers' just evil unhappiness.
Yeah.
And in the book, it happens, I think, much later. It happens way after, like, Maxim has already confessed to the murder, and she's, like, trying to get things together, and everything is, like, in a mess. And Mrs. Danvers comes to her, like, with the menu for the day, and it's, like, the leftovers from the night before. And she's, like, she sends a message to Mrs. Danvers and says, like, please tell Mrs. Danvers this is not acceptable. Like, we won't be eating leftovers. Like, we will have a hot meal tonight. Like, please relay that message. And Mrs. Danvers comes to her and says, like, Mrs. De Winter would never have sent a message to me by one of the lower servants. Like, how dare you, basically. And that's when she says, I think you'll find I'm Mrs. De Winter now. And it's so good and it's perfect because it's when she's already sort of begun to stand in her truth and like stand in her power.
All it took was a murder. She's just become very good at murder. Yeah.
Or covering up murder,
Accessory to
shall we say.
She was born to be an accessory to murder after the fact.
I will say there is someone in this movie that we haven't talked about who I think is wonderful.
Okay.
But a little miscast.
You're talking about Melville Cooper as the
I'm not. He's amazing. I am talking about George Sanders as cousin Favell, cousin Jack Favell.
Yeah.
Just we've yet to get through an episode of the show without talking about All About Eve. Today's no exception. George Sanders playing the same character basically that he played in All About Eve, but 10 years younger. The same.
I don't think it's the same character.
He's just like the scheming, like the voice is the same. He talks through his nose. He's so arch. He's so like underhanded. He's so villainous. But like Jack is supposed to be kind of sexy.
He's sexual. And George Sanders is kind of sexless.
He's sexless. Yeah. Like, let me put it this way. I don't believe that George Sanders was ever in a position to impregnate Rebecca.
No.
That doesn't strike me as a thing.
Like, and Danvers makes the big thing about, like, she was having fun with all of you. It was a laugh to her. Like, I don't know that George Sanders would be that much of a laugh for Rebecca.
Yeah.
He's one of those situations where, unlike Fontaine and Olivier and Anderson, Sanders is great and charismatic, and he's never anything other than watchable. He is miscast in this, though.
Yeah, I just get the impression that like George Sanders was like someone Hitchcock liked and wanted to cast, and he was like, okay, well, who could you be? I guess you can be this guy.
And you're not going to argue.
Yeah.
If you're a working actor,
yeah.
If you're working actor George Sanders in 1939, you're not going to tell Hitch.
Yeah.
Like, no, I won't do that.
Yeah. I feel like I don't have that much more about this version because I think we're in this does happen to us sometimes that the oldest version is such a classic that it's almost just the same as the source material. Like we don't have a lot to say about it as an adaptation.
I think it does a really good job of streamlining everything.
Yeah, I do too.
The script is really smart. It combines so many different scenes. Well, like one of the things that it does is I feel like every single version handles the decision to have the costume ball differently. And this one is very much, you were talking about I am Mrs. De Winter now.
Yeah.
It ties the decision to have the costume ball directly to that moment.
Yeah.
Where she's going to Danvers saying, I am Mrs. De Winter now, and we will have a costume ball.
God
That's
damn
like
it,
the
yes.
next part of it. Like, I think that's smart. I don't necessarily going to say it's the best way to do that, but it's not a bad way to do it. It's a good way to do it. It's a really smart screenplay.
Yeah.
So a couple changes that are made that I think are notable. couple. One, Danvers dies at the end in a fire,
Yep.
which to me feels like a very Hitchcock thing.
Yeah.
Because she sets the fire and then is just so swept up in being in Rebecca's room while the fire burns around her that I don't even know if she wants to escape at that point.
Yeah.
Like, is it suicide by
fire?
By fire?
I mean, I will just to point out, like, the end of the book is very ambiguous. Like, every version that we saw goes way more into like what happened. And the end of the book is just they're driving back from London. They found out Rebecca had cancer. They think everything's going to be okay. They drove all night because Maxim was like anxious to get home. He thought something was wrong. And it's like we were cresting the hill and we saw the glow of Manderley in front of us.
We thought it was dawn breaking on the horizon, but that doesn't
wasn't.
make sense because it's to the west. And he goes, "That's not the sun. That's Manderley."
And that's it. And we knew that Mrs. Danvers had like taken off like earlier in the day because someone had told him. There's none of the scene of like they get there and they're worried. And
like
Mrs. Danvers is in the house.
Imagine Office Space, but you don't see Milton on the beach at the end. Like, he has been talking the entire movie about how he's going to set the building on fire.
Yeah.
And then the building does get set on fire.
Yeah.
But, like, you don't see, there's no aftermath.
Yeah.
You don't see him in the crowd sneaking away.
Yeah.
So you know that he did it.
Yeah. I will say also, like, this is very silly, but in terms of casting, like, you pointed out that, like, in many versions of things that we see when there's, like, a character that's a dog, sometimes it's a different kind of dog in every version. Yeah. In this, it's the same. It may as well have been the same dog every single time.
No, like Jasper's always a Cocker Spaniel, but the thing that's so fun to watch these is that dog breeds change over the years.
Yeah.
So a Cocker Spaniel looks different in 2020 than they do in 1940.
Yeah.
So yes, it's always a Cocker Spaniel, but Jasper looks different in every version.
Oh, Jasper.
I want to mention 3 things really quickly, and I know we've gone over time, so I just want to make sure. 1, let's talk about Rebecca's death for a moment. He does not kill her.
Yes. Oh, yes. That's a big change.
Because the Hays Code, the Hollywood Production Code, basically said we cannot have someone kill someone and not pay for it.
The good ended happily, the bad unhappily. That is what fiction means.
Right. That's not what happens in the original novel.
Yes.
So in this one, what he's describing is not him shooting her and dying. It falls and hits her head and dies.
Yeah. So it's less like I killed her and I'm really traumatized about that. It's more like it was an accident, but who would believe me?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that is the thing that I think is worth mentioning. It's one of 3 different ways that Rebecca dies in all of these versions.
Oh yeah, because in one he strangles her, doesn't he? Yeah,
right.
Ooh.
It's graphic.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Second thing, this is my little personal nitpick. This is my little thing. I'm gonna say. I'm gonna throw out my personal nitpick, and then I think I'm gonna cue you for your personal nitpick.
Okay.
The thing that I kept looking for in all of these versions was, how do they handle the costume ball scene? How do they handle her walking down the stairs?
Yeah.
Because it was, when I was reading the book, it grabbed me and it was so effective and it just felt like all the air was being sucked out of the room. I didn't love it in this version. I didn't love it. And it was for one specific reason. There's music in the background and the music doesn't stop when she walks into the room and everyone's like shocked. And I feel like that's the moment where you want there to be just awkward silence. Or something like that. You want something that's going to evoke something like that. This did not grab me the way the book did. Not even close.
Yeah.
So that's my little nitpick. I'll bring up the costume ball scene and all the other ones. Lastly, I'm going to throw it to you. In this one, Joan Fontaine was 23 years old and Laurence Olivier was 33 years old. How do you feel about that?
I think it's okay because people looked old in the 40s anyway.
Yeah.
So like he's 33, whatever. He's Laurence Olivier. Like he can be whatever age.
Mm-hmm.
I think the 10-year difference between them is certainly noticeable, but not so much so as to be uncomfortable. Yes, this is the nitpicky thing because like it was literally
I just feel like this is what you always
it was like
looked
Goldilocks
for.
and the Three Bears. It was like this one's too old, this one's too young, this one might be just right.
Yeah.
So yes, we are going to keep coming back to this. Thank you for reminding me.
Speaking of just right, I do think as far as age goes, there is one Maxim de Winter who I'm going to go ahead and say was just right.
Okay.
Because in 1979 there was a miniseries. And thankfully, we were able to watch it.
Yeah, it was a really, just like caveat, it was a really bad rip. Like it was kind of blurry, so like it was sometimes a little hard to watch, but we did get through the whole thing.
But even a bad rip is not going to stand in the way of some truly fantastic performances, because this was 1979. It was a BBC miniseries directed, by the way, by Simon Langton, who did the '95 Pride and Prejudice. And I felt like I had this thing happening while we were watching it, where because I knew that it was directed by him, and because we hold that Pride and Prejudice in such high regard, I think I may have I might have made some inferences about the quality of the production that I wouldn't have
Yeah.
if I didn't know he was directing it. Because my feeling throughout the entire thing was this is directed incredibly well, considering that it's so limited.
Yeah.
That it's made for no budget. They're constantly switching back and forth between video on a soundstage and film out in the open. It doesn't always work, but it's directed really, really well, I feel.
Yeah.
If I didn't know that he was directing it, maybe I wouldn't feel that way.
Yeah.
But I do think this is directed well.
There was some weird stuff about the production values, which I think we'll get to.
Yeah.
But okay.
But directed by Simon Langton, written by Hugh Whitemore. I think there are 3 people who are worth mentioning.
Yeah, we're bearing the lead a little bit here.
Yeah. 1, Joanna David plays the second Mrs. De Winter.
And she was in the 1995 Pride and Prejudice.
Yep.
And she was also in an Emma.
Mm-hmm.
No,
she's in A
she's
Sense
in
and
A Sense and
Sensibility.
Sensibility. I'm so sorry.
That's
I got
okay.
confused.
It stars Anna Massey as Mrs. Danvers.
Again, wonderfully cast. Like, so good.
So perfectly
so
cast.
good.
And
Sherlock Holmes.
Sherlock Holmes himself, Jeremy Brett, as Maxim De Winter, who is he's the best Sherlock Holmes of all time, and he plays Maxim De Winter. And
It's so fucking weird to see him in another role because he didn't play that many roles. Like he's not in that much.
He's Freddy in My Fair
Yeah.
Lady, and he's Sherlock Holmes.
And he's this, and he's Max De Winter.
Yeah.
It's just weird. I mean, I will say this. I guess I always heard and was told that Sherlock Holmes was such a method actor. Like he had just created this character. I think like slightly less of Jeremy Brett now because the mannerisms and the voice and the things that he does and his little funny ways are not unique to Sherlock Holmes. He does them all here, every single one of them. Like his little funny smiles and like his voice is exactly the same.
Yeah. He's an actor. He does his thing.
He just has a thing that he does.
But it works.
But it's just funny that I feel like I've been told for so many years like
Yeah.
what a unique and characteristic performance he gives as Sherlock Holmes, which again is perfect. But he's also perfect as this character. It was just very weird for me to see him as another character. Delightful, but very weird.
I'm going to go out and say this. He is my favorite Maxim De Winter.
Yeah.
Of all of them. To me, he's my favorite, not because he's the only one I enjoyed, because I kind of enjoyed most of them.
Yeah.
He's just my favorite because he, to me, was the closest to the book.
Yeah.
He managed to be charismatic and attractive, but also older.
Yeah, older and like standoffish in a way that Maxim is definitely described in the book, and like the way that he sort of takes charge at the end. You like looked at me and you were like, "Calm down, Sherlock."
There's this
Sherlock
scene,
Maxim.
He literally says like someone. I think Favel's talking about the envelope, and he goes, "What did you do with the envelope?" And I was like, "Okay, Sherlock, calm down."
Calm down. The other thing, like not for nothing, worth noting, just to kind of ratchet up the tension on set, I suppose. Jeremy Brett and Anna Massey are ex-spouses and have a child together.
Yeah.
They were not spouses for very long. It sounds like
And it was all prior to this.
it was years prior to this. It was 20 years prior to this. My understanding, and I perhaps have not heard both sides of the story, is that he was not faithful to her and she did not like this.
Mm-hmm. Which is fair.
Which is fair. So, my sympathy is with her, honestly. And so it struck me as awkward, but then it occurred to me if they have a child together, obviously, like this is not the first time they've seen each other in 20 years.
Yeah.
Clearly they're professionals, but it was just weird to me. Like there's a genuine history there between these two actors that is interesting in the way that you might imagine it colors the on-screen relationship. Some of the production values were a little weird. Some of the costumes were a little weird. At one point, you were like, "Is this period?" He was wearing like
He was wearing a turtleneck.
a turtleneck, and I wasn't sure that the turtlenecks were in the 1930s.
My note was, I'm going to trust them that turtlenecks are period accurate because I don't know.
And then in the next scene, I was like, "Is he wearing a silk polo shirt?" And you were like, "I think so." The one big thing I noticed is so there's a very like kind of important scene where Mrs. Danvers is showing the new Mrs. De Winter Rebecca's room and like all of her things, and like just sort of almost goes into this like fugue state, talking about like how I used to brush her hair and like we used to do this and like we used to do that, and at one point she says like, and this is from the book, she says, look at this room, isn't it lovely? It's the loveliest room you've ever seen. And I was like, it's really not.
It's
it
not.
was a very ugly room, in fact. I think
It's
very few of these productions had the money to really do this room in
just
the
two
way.
of them.
Yeah.
Just two of them. Like that's it. I mean, the Hitchcock one seems to be the canonical version of what Rebecca's rooms look like.
Yeah, it's like this huge
giant,
room.
cavernous,
Yeah.
beautiful.
This was
Like it could only be a movie set. Like a house of that time would never have a room that big.
This was like, it was very dark. There was a lot of dark wood. It was very masculine. Like it really didn't look like this beautiful airy bourgeois. I will say too, one character we haven't talked that much about is B, Maxim's sister. She's beautifully cast in a lot of these. In this version, she's Vivian Pickles, who, in addition to having one of the best names in show business, you may know as Harold's mother from Harold and Maude. And I just think, again, perfectly just beautifully cast. I don't know what you thought, but like I
thought she was
really
very
loved
good.
her energy.
I didn't really know her before this, so I didn't bring that context to it. I thought she was very good.
Yeah. The one place they did fall down again, Favell. I don't know why he seems like he's hard to cast. But remember this pudgy little guy?
He was nothing.
He was just
this
nothing.
Favell is nothing.
He's really nothing. And it was a little upsetting because the rest of the cast is so good.
Here's okay. So we'll come back to good stuff. I want to talk about my big criticism because the production values, the like switching from video to film, I don't even really consider that a big criticism because everything worked that way. You know, that's like criticizing Hitchcock for working in black and white. Like that's just, movies were black and white back then.
Yeah.
You know, BBC miniseries were video and film.
Yeah.
So that's not a big criticism. My big criticism is about episode 4. So this whole thing is 4 episodes. The pace, more often than not, I think they make the pace work for them.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that happens early on, there's that breakfast that he and the second Mrs. De Winter share.
Yeah.
It is a long scene.
Yeah.
It's very long. It's way longer than the scene would ever be in a movie.
You mean at the hotel?
Yeah,
in Monte Carlo.
Yeah. No movie would ever do the scene as long as they do here because it's a miniseries and they have the time to do it. Thankfully, the writing is good, and Jeremy Brett and Joanna David are both really good, and they make it work.
Yeah.
And I only noticed how long it was because I happened to look at my watch. I wasn't feeling like it was long. It just was a very long scene. So I feel like most of the time that they make the pacing work for them. In the 4th episode, though, I don't think they really pull it off. I think it kind of falls apart.
Well, because they're all like in this little room doing like
they're doing the Poirot thing.
Doing the Poirot thing. They're calling in different witnesses and like
because I feel like that's not a Sherlock Holmes thing.
Yeah,
I don't think he like would stand out in front of everyone and call people in one by one and reveal to everyone what happened.
No, Sherlock Holmes works alone. He does not question people like in front of everyone.
No,
like
that's
this.
a Poirot thing.
Yeah,
and I mean not just Poirot, but that feels like a Poirot thing. It just kind of fell apart for me. I did, and part of it was Favell because Favell showed up earlier, and we both were like, "This guy doesn't really work." But Favell is such a big part of that 4th act that it just kind of falls apart.
Yeah.
It didn't do it for me
because,
at the end.
Because the whole point is that Favell has come with this accusation, which has the benefit of being true.
Yeah.
And he keeps calling these witnesses saying, well, surely this person will bear out what I'm trying to say. And each one just gets like worse and worse, and his case just gets worse and worse.
Like,
and,
to people who love the book, anyone wondering, we haven't even mentioned Ben yet.
Ben,
How
yeah,
could
we
we
haven't
not
talked about
mention Ben? Like Ben's there and he's present.
Yeah, he just gets more and more frustrated because his witnesses are not doing the thing for him that he thinks they should be doing. And it's like the only reason we think this is hilarious and not super frustrating is because Favell is worse than Maxim, right?
Yeah.
I will say again, like something that I wished they had done in this version, because as you mentioned, they had the extra time to spend. There's a scene that not every version included, but this one did, where Maxim's sister takes the new Mrs. De Winter to see their old grandmother, who is like not 100% there, like mentally, but very sweet. And they're having this conversation, and then the grandmother, like, she just gets confused, and she's like, wait, who is this person? And B's like, this is Maxim's wife. And she just gets very upset because she's very disoriented and confused and not quite there. And she's just saying, like, what are you talking about? Like, where's Rebecca? Like, Rebecca's Maxim's wife. Why don't you bring Rebecca to see me? I want to see Rebecca. And it's very upsetting for everybody. And they quickly leave. So that scene is in this. But the scene in the book immediately after makes you really love B. And, sometimes I feel like up to this point, you didn't necessarily know like whose side bees on, and like, is she going to be nice to this person? Is she not? And she is genuinely devastated and mortified. She was like, I shouldn't have brought you here. I feel so bad. Like, what will you think of me for doing this to you? You know, she just genuinely feels horrible. And I wish that any version that has this grandmother scene also shows just right afterwards, and it doesn't have to be a long scene, but just how bad, or even you could even do it within the scene itself, just how bad B feels about it, because I think it really gives us a lot of insight into her as a character and helps us love her and trust her. But you know,
this one doesn't do that.
This one does not do that. And I wish, the only reason I'm pointing it out is, as you say, they have a lot of extra time to work with because it's a 4-part miniseries, and it seems like they could have spent 2 minutes on that.
Yeah. Can I mention like 3 quick things?
Yeah.
And then I'm done. What else do you have on this one?
I have a couple things, but go ahead.
Okay. Maybe there's some of the same things. One, I had an observation about Mr. Brett that I thought was kind of funny. So how would you describe Freddie in My Fair Lady? Would you say he's a very passionate man?
Very passionate.
Does he think about love a lot?
A lot.
Right? How would you describe Sherlock Holmes?
Completely asexual.
Completely. This Maxim is like right in the midway point.
Right in the middle.
In the middle.
Well, there's it's funny because this is one of the things I wanted to mention. There's this point where Favell like kind of points at Maxim and is like, he knew we were lovers. And the camera cuts to Jeremy Brett and he's just like, his expression seems to say, I was fine with it.
Yeah.
Like, I have sex.
Yeah.
I have sex, but I don't have sexual jealousy, really. Yeah. Like, I'm okay.
I've grown up a lot since My Fair Lady.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he doesn't not have sex. That's Sherlock, right? Like, Sherlock does not have sex. But this is a man that, you know, if the opportunity presents itself, and Mrs. Danvers even says that, like, you know, at one, they have this, you know, that awful scene where she tells the new Mrs. De Winter to jump out a window.
Yeah.
And she's saying, you know, he's not happy with you. He doesn't love you. How could he love you? And the new Mrs. Danvers is sort of fighting her and saying, well,
New Mrs. De Winter.
New Mrs. De Winter. I'm so sorry. I think I misspoke earlier.
I just want to make sure.
It's fine. Actually, I do want to talk about that in a second. But you know, she's sort of pushing back and saying, like, you didn't see him when we were in Italy together. Like, he was so happy on our honeymoon. Like, he was laughing and joking. He wasn't like this. And Mrs. Danvers kind of laughs cruelly and says, well, he enjoyed himself, of course. What man would, like, restrain himself on his honeymoon, or words to that effect? And it's like, oh, gross. But he's had the sex. He's okay. If the opportunity presents itself, you know, he would, but he doesn't need it, I guess.
Can I just jump in? Because we've gotten so far and we haven't really talked about Joanna David.
Yeah.
I just want to be really straightforward. She shows up a bunch in the shows that we do. We love her. I think she's really good in this. I just think she's kind of miscast.
Yeah.
I think she's too old.
And I hate to say people are too, you know, there's this like women in Hollywood thing, you know, so I hate to be like, well, she's too old. But she's a little too old.
She's just... It's not even that she is too. She projects too old for the character.
It's her maturity. It's her maturity and self-confidence, which, you know, she has as an actor. She is a very self-assured, confident actor, which serves her very well, but maybe not for this part.
I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah,
it's one small criticism that I have, even though she is quite good in it.
Yeah, and the other thing that I kind of wanted to mention that I think bears mentioning, not necessarily specific to this version, but like there is a very canonical queer reading of the relationship between Mrs. Danvers and Rebecca. I don't know that any of these versions deliberately leaned into.
2020 didn't.
2020 didn't, and
if anyone was going to,
that was sort of a disappointment that I was looking for it, and I didn't see it. Like, if anyone, I almost thought that Judith Anderson did the most. No, you don't understand. I was in love with Rebecca, and it has driven me mad. You know, this sort of like predatory evil lesbian thing, which is a trope, right? Like but I think it's like, it's interesting because it maybe is more of like a 1940s trope than a 2021 trope. I think it's way more problematic in 2021 to have this like evil scheming like lesbian character. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a little hard to both say that Rebecca was bisexual, you know, or pansexual,
or whatever
however you want to define her, and have that not be a criticism, you know, and also have Danvers be like romantically in love with her, and have that like, I just feel like it might be a little hard to explain to people, not that it's not that worth arguing, but to say like, no, Danvers is the worst, but not because of that. I want to be really clear. Nothing inherently about that makes her bad, but she is bad for all these other things. That's a hard argument to have.
Yeah. I guess all I would say is there are some very, very specifically based on what I know of Daphne du Maurier and this book, on purpose queer themes in the book that I was looking for, particularly, and we haven't even gotten to it yet, but like particularly in the 2020 version, that I was a little disappointed that I didn't see in any version. Like
Yeah.
no one really leaned into it. I really wanted to understand, like in the book, Maxim literally says when he's talking about what Rebecca told him about herself to his new wife, these revelations about herself. He says, she was this, she was this, she was that. And then he says, she wasn't even normal. What does he mean normal? Like sleeping with a lot of men doesn't mean not normal, like in the way that would be used in the book. She wasn't even normal, I think means she was doing other stuff that wasn't just your straightforward run-of-the-mill cheating on me with other men.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's not specific to the 1979 version, but I thought I would bring it up, particularly as in this version, not to bring the actors' personal lives into anything, but Jeremy Brett, famously a bisexual man.
Yeah.
So anyway, the last thing I think we wanted to talk about we just want to touch on the ages of the characters.
So
here.
like I said, I think Jeremy Brett is the perfect age for this. He's like 46.
Yeah.
And he was just
It's
kind
perfect.
of
Yeah,
walked
46
off
is
the
perfect.
page.
Yeah.
But Joanna David's 32.
And it's too old.
Like
I'm sorry, it's too old.
there is an age difference, and there should be an age difference, but she's projected too old.
She's too mature. I would say too mature almost rather than too old.
Too mature.
Yeah.
All right. Almost 20 years go by. We get to 1997, and we get another miniseries. I say two-part. One of these two-part like PBS movies. Directed by Jim O'Brien, written by Arthur Hopcraft. We have Emilia Fox as Mrs. De Winter. What is the interesting thing about Emilia Fox?
Fascinatingly, she is Joanna David's daughter.
Which isn't that adorable?
It's really
Wouldn't
cute.
that be nice to say to your mom, like, hey, you know how you were in Rebecca? I'm in Rebecca now.
Rebecca.
You should watch it. Also, I get naked.
I get my tits out.
Deal with it. Charles Dance as Maxim De Winter.
Yeah.
And Diana Rigg as Mrs. Danvers.
Yeah.
Among
others.
I'm going to even go a little bit further right here because the cast is pretty impressive because you also have Geraldine James as Beatrice,
so
who I was looking forward to more than anybody. When I found out that she was in it, I was looking forward to it so much. She's the most beautiful.
She came on screen
so
and
beautiful.
She came on screen and I like put my hand on your knee. Her part is not very big, but
Yeah.
I like turned to you and I was like, she's so beautiful. And
So
you were like, I
beautiful.
know.
Faye Dunaway as Mrs. Van Hopper. Like, this is a cast. This is a good cast.
Faye Dunaway
you know?
was terrible in this.
Well, you're just jumping right into
I'm
it.
so sorry, but she was terrible.
Well, we'll get to her. Maybe we'll get to her right now.
We'll get to her in a minute. We'll get to. Well, we haven't really given much screen time to Mrs. Van Hopper. Really.
No, she was doing something.
She was doing
I don't know
something.
what she was doing, but I didn't care for
I
it.
love it.
Can I just give like my umbrella comment for this one?
Yeah.
Because I think you were in agreement.
Yeah.
For every one thing it does that's really, really good, it does three things that are not.
Yes, the number I was going to say was 3, not 2, but 3.
Yeah.
It was like 25% really good
This
and
is-
like 75% very weird or bad.
Yeah, which is not usually what we see.
No.
Usually the stuff that's weird or bad doesn't have anything that's good in it.
Yeah.
But this has some stuff that's legitimately
So
very
good.
I'm going to throw out a thing that is legitimately very good. Emilia Fox might be the best casting for the new Mrs. De Winter.
She was wonderful. She
Mhm.
had the right energy. She was the right age for it. You could see immediately why he was attracted to her. She was young, but she wasn't stupid. Like she was so cute, and she had some.
She was feisty
She was
too.
feisty. Like she sort of stood in her power even
Mhm.
right from the beginning, which I think in a modern, I say modern, but like a more modern adaptation, you sort of have to. You sort of she can't be so passive, or she's not sympathetic. She was feisty. She fought with
Mhm.
him a little bit at the beginning. She was like, "Look, if we're gonna do this, like this is how it's gonna be." And she was such a believable 22-year-old. She didn't
Yeah.
seem like a baby, but she didn't seem like she had been an adult for very long yet.
So that's a thing there I'm going to throw out as being incredibly good. I don't think the script supported her as being like the best version of the character.
Yeah.
But if we're only looking at casting, I think she is the best casting.
Yeah.
Can I just throw another little thing about casting? Because I want to focus on the good, before
Yeah.
we get to the weird.
Yeah.
Weirdly, the best version of Favell of anything that we watched. There's a guy named Jonathan Cake as Jack Favell.
Oh yeah,
He was amazing.
he was so good. He was so good. I wrote Favell is kind of perfect.
Like, he's handsome and smarmy, but in exactly the right way. He looks so period appropriate. He was fantastic, and I loved him. He was the best.
So I'm gonna address the elephant in the room.
Do you want to change the subject?
I'm gonna change the subject, and I think we just need to get into it. My very first note. Yeah, Jeremy's pointing at his first note, which is the same as my first note. What I wrote down is he's old enough that this is gross. And Jeremy wrote he's too old.
Yeah.
And
it's Charles Dance as Maxim de Winter.
Charles Dance as Maxim de Winter.
She was 23, he was 51.
It never got better. I never got used to it. I never enjoyed it. I did not enjoy seeing them in bed together.
This is a very sexual version,
it's
too. You see them making out naked a lot.
A lot. I never leaned into it. It was always gross. And it was not the fact that he was 51. I mean, Jeremy Brett, as you pointed out, was 47. And 47 and 51 are not that far apart. 46. But 46 and 51 are not that far apart, like, as far as someone's appearance, right? Like, if Jeremy Brett had been 51, I don't know that would have made that much of a difference. Because I know what he looked like when he was 51, and he looked fine.
Now, I'm just going to stop you before you go any further.
Yeah.
Can you talk about Charles Dance's appearance in a way that isn't body shaming?
Maybe not. Charles Dance, I did not find personally attractive. That's not to say that no one would ever find him attractive. I just think that the things that make someone look old, he has them.
Yeah.
In sort of a Charlton Heston way, that like his teeth aren't great and his lips are kind of wrinkly and like his hands are really old looking. It was just a combination of factors that I was unable to find him sexy. So it was a problem for me throughout. And also like him being with this young, beautiful, almost childlike Emilia Fox just truly grossed me out throughout, and I couldn't get past it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I will say, the filmmakers fucking leaned into it so hard.
Do you know how we previously had a discussion about what hanging a lantern on it means? This is hanging a lantern on it. When you have an actor who is old enough to be that, like, in a romantic relationship and he's old enough to be her father, hanging a lantern on it is having him say multiple times in the course of the show, I'm old enough to be your father.
He says at one point, I'm twice your age, and I wrote down more than twice. There were some very, very strange choices that this production made. One of them was casting Charles Dance. One of them was setting the whole thing in the 1920s for some reason. I don't know if they had like flapper costumes or something they wanted to use.
I mean, we talked about it when we were watching it, that like it made a kind of sense where if someone was adapting it and said, well, the book was published in 1938, but it's written in the past tense.
Yeah.
So if it's been about 10 years, then that means everything that was happening was taking place in the 20s.
Sure.
That makes a kind of sense.
That makes a kind of sense.
But like, I just don't think that's accurate.
Yeah.
Especially because one of the things I didn't mention before is that du Maurier was apparently pretty upfront about the fact that of all the movies that were made of her work, the only two she liked were Rebecca and Don't Look Now.
Yeah.
And if one of her favorites is Rebecca and it was set in the present day of 1940, apparently the timing of it wasn't important to her.
Yeah.
So I just don't understand why this choice was made, because it does make it kind of weird.
Yeah. This was the only one that I found Maxim's behavior towards his new wife genuinely abusive. I literally wrote down cycle of abuse. It's like, I'm really, really mean and awful to you, and then I apologize, and then you feel better, and then I'm mean again, but a little bit worse, but then I'm even nicer. It was like, it's the true cycle of abuse. So again, to see him so much older than her, so much more powerful, so much richer, just so much more status, and also to do things to her that I genuinely found quite abusive in the way that he spoke to her and acted. They added this scene that I thought was, again, such odd choices in this production. Again, usually when we talk about productions in this way, it's because we hated them so much, but there were some really great things too that we'll talk. I mean, the casting of Emilia Fox being one of them, and her performance was great. They're on their honeymoon. They're on this like cruise ship or boat, and she goes and like has like the makeup artist do her makeup and like dress her up in this sort of flapper style, like in a way she hasn't dressed before, thinking like, oh, I'm gonna surprise my new husband, like I'm gonna be so beautiful. And so she comes down to dinner and it's this big surprise, and he looks up and she says, good evening, Mr. De Winter. And she's got this makeup on, and he gets so angry and like drags her out of there and humiliates her and drags her back to the room and like makes her wash her face, and she's crying and she's like, I don't understand why you're treating me this way. He apologizes and apparently it's all better. My assumption is that the idea is this is now foreshadowing your costume ball scene, right?
Right.
He's upset with her for dressing or behaving in a certain way. But logically, it seems to me that the thing about the costume ball scene is she didn't know he was going to behave that way. He's never behaved that way before.
That's one of the things that makes it so uncomfortable.
That's one of the things that makes it so uncomfortable. And it does seem that logically, a human being, if like you had already tried this thing of I'm going to dress up in a particular way and like do something surprising and shocking in my appearance, and I know that this sort of like volatile abusive person gets very upset when I did that once, why would I do it again? Doing it again makes her kind of stupid, and I don't think she is stupid. I think the whole point, as you pointed out earlier, of that scene is like, how would she possibly know he was going to react in that way? But in this, like, she had a foreshadowing of it, just like we, the audience, did. So why did she do it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I feel like this script definitely handles logic in a way it just doesn't handle it as well as some of the other ones did. I'm not saying that like all of the other ones are these perfect logical productions.
Logic, yeah.
You know, like there's obviously a suspension of disbelief, but this one does not encourage me to suspend my disbelief. Like the one that I'll point out is the way the plot happens is Danvers plants the seed in her head that she should be Caroline de Winter for the party because she knows that Rebecca was that. And then she comes down and he gets really mad, but then she doesn't really talk to him for the rest of the night. She never even has an opportunity to say to him, it was Mrs. Danvers' idea.
Yeah.
She suggested it to me. They don't see each other. They see each other at the party. He's never alone with her, so she never has a chance to talk to him. Then she like goes to bed, and then the ship crashes, and like everything is happening, and he's dealing with the ship, and then they find Rebecca's boat. All this stuff is happening. Then finally they get to have a conversation, and the first time they get to have a one-on-one conversation since she walked down those stairs is him going, I killed my wife.
Yeah.
By the way, I do think that Rebecca would make a really amazing double feature with The Fugitive.
Yeah.
Because I just think it's really funny to just like, I didn't kill my wife and I did kill my wife. I think that's a fun double feature. But they don't see each other. That's the first conversation. In this one, though, they write a scene. There's a good amount of time that happens between the costume ball and the ship crashing. So there's an entire scene of the two of them having an argument, having a fight about her in the dress. And it doesn't make sense to me because if that scene actually happened, why wouldn't she ever say it was Mrs. Danvers' idea?
Yeah, it's just like her sort of having these like more general grievances, like you treat me like a child, like you don't treat me well, like I can't trust you, you know, all this stuff. But they're not actually talking about the actual problem, which is she dressed up the same way Rebecca did, and why aren't they like discussing that?
They're not discussing it at all.
Yeah.
It's terrible communication. It doesn't make it brought me right out of the story because I couldn't suspend my disbelief anymore.
Yeah.
It made no sense
Yeah.
to me.
Why
did I write down weird time to fuck? Oh, it's after he
tells her.
Do you want to talk about him telling her, by the way?
Yeah, like they're out. So I think every other version and indeed in the original, like obviously, like when he tells her about this situation with Rebecca, I think they're always in the cabin,
the
like Rebecca's little cabin,
little seaside cottage.
Yeah, where she like brought her lovers.
Yeah.
In this, they're just like in the woods. There's lots of people around because there's that whole boat situation is happening like right now, and I just wrote down shh. Like he's like loudly confessing to murder like in the woods, and then she's like, we'll get through this together, and then they go back to the house and bone a bunch.
By the way, can I just, this isn't even a criticism of this one, this is just an observation. How much is Danvers' plan? Like I've talked about fucking gambles before.
Yeah.
Danvers' plan is a fucking gamble.
like that she wouldn't say anything.
She's really gambling that she's never going to say to him, it was Mrs. Danvers' idea. Because if he knew that Danvers went to her and said, you should dress up as Caroline de Winter, he's going to fire her immediately.
Yeah. And
he
also,
might kill her. He's done it before.
And also like really gambling because, you know, she says like, I'm going to keep it a secret. It's going to be a big surprise. But like also really gambling that she's able to keep a secret.
Yeah.
If we were going to a costume ball and I was like, I'm going to keep my costume a secret, you might be like, haha, yeah, that's fun. I'd be able to keep it a secret for about 15 seconds. Like I'd be like, let me show you my costume.
Like the way that I would love to see it happen, which would never be appropriate for the story, is for her to actually keep her costume a secret, but not keep it a secret that Mrs. Danvers helped her with it.
Yeah.
Like constantly mentioning, you're going to love my costume.
Mrs. Danvers,
it was her idea.
It was her idea.
It was her idea. Because that would scare the shit out of Mrs. Danvers, right? Because she knows what's going to happen.
So that's great.
Oh, this is the third way that Rebecca dies. He does throttle her.
He does throttle her. There is a flashback. And you see her in this one.
She's cast. We have Lucy Cohu is an actress that plays Rebecca.
Yeah, and you never see her whole face,
Yeah.
but you, like the scene where he's talking about like, oh, she told me all about herself. You hear her voice and you just see her eyes. I think you see her eyes sometimes and her lips sometimes, but like never the whole face.
Can I talk about Colonel Julian?
Yes, let's talk about Colonel Julian.
He's nothing.
I literally wrote, where the fuck is Julian?
I came to a decision in this moment when we were watching this, and I'd been thinking about it a lot, and I felt this strongly. If you're gonna make Rebecca the thing you should do that no one had done, Julian needs to be a goddamn movie star. Have someone come in and own it as Colonel Julian. That was how I felt in the moment, and this is what made me feel that way.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say whether I feel that way now. I'll come back to that. But this does the opposite. Julian is nothing.
Yeah.
He has no agency within all of this stuff happening at all. He's just watching like Maxim and Favel fight and not saying anything about it until it's like way too late. It's dumb. It's nothing. It was right around when Julian happened that I was just like, man, this thing just keeps shooting itself in the foot. Every good choice it makes three terrible choices.
Yeah. And speaking of terrible choices,
Do you want to talk about the epilogue?
I think I want to talk about the ending. Well, there's an epilogue, but there's an ending too.
That's true.
Yeah. So this is, I was like, it is just like Jane Eyre.
Yeah.
So they
right.
they come back. Let me describe it, and you jump in if I miss anything. They come back. The house is on fire. All the servants and the dogs are all safe. They're all out in the yard.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't even really talked about the butler, Frith. You know, they run up to Frith and they're like, is everybody okay? And he's like, everyone's accounted for except Mrs. Danvers. And Maxim is like, oh my God, I better run in there. She might still be alive. And Amelia Fox, trying to stop him from running into a burning building, like, again, this is like making the subtext text in a really like awkward way. She's like, maybe she doesn't want to be alive. And it's like, yeah, maybe, but I don't know how you would know that in the context of this plot. So anyway, there's a whole scene. It's literally the exact same, like shot for shot. It looks like the end of Jane Eyre.
The 90s Jane Eyre, the William Hurt one.
Yeah, that came out
a year before.
Yeah, he like runs in. The whole place is on fire. He finds her in the bedroom. Like everything's on fire. He like throws her over his shoulder. Then he loses her, I think, somehow. And then,
they fall down the
stairs. Oh my God, it's just the same. I looked over to you and I was like, do you think he lost a hand?
Yeah.
And an eye, and he's blind. And then they cut to this epilogue. It's like years later, they're living in some country, and he's got, I think he did lose a hand.
He's got a glove on one hand. Clearly, he went through something, and his face is scarred on one side.
He's got a cane, and like she's taking care of him, and it literally is like the end of Jane Eyre. And I don't understand why that choice was made.
Maybe it's a Joan Fontaine reference. Maybe they love the original. Maybe they love the original and they love Joan Fontaine and they love her so much, and their favorite two things she ever did were Rebecca and Jane Eyre.
What a weird
It doesn't work.
thing.
Importantly, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
That's the thing about it. Their romance doesn't work for me in this at all, which is weird because this is like an intensely sexual romance.
Yeah.
But the cycle of abuse really prevented me from really giving a shit about their relationship.
Yeah.
And it just kind of exists. It's a weird one. Do you want to move on?
Yeah, I would guess I would only say, like, if you like Rebecca, I think you should watch it. I wouldn't say don't watch it, because there's some good stuff in it, but it's fucking weird, and they made some fucking weird choices.
Just for the second Mrs. De Winter and Favel, I think it's worth watching.
Yeah.
And there's other little interesting things throughout it. Just don't watch it for Faye Dunaway.
Yeah,
because
God.
her performance, she's in a different movie.
Yeah.
She's in a completely different movie.
As she tends to be.
Tonally, totally different. And it doesn't work in this even a little at all ever.
Yeah.
Do you want to move on?
Yeah, let's move on. Last one.
I want to, just super quick, I want to mention there are like a couple other versions of it. There was one, I feel really bad. Someone really wanted us to watch the Italian version that came in like 2008. It's kind of on YouTube, but it's in Italian, but also dubbed at the same time in Russian with English subtitles, and it's only the first half. And so we didn't.
We
and I'm
watch it.
sorry. I wanted to, but we didn't.
We didn't.
And that's sad.
Okay.
So we move on to 2020.
Okay.
This is directed by Ben Wheatley. It's done a lot of low-budget stuff. Written by Jane Goldman, Joe Shrapnel, and Anna Waterhouse. Jane Goldman has done a number of things. She works with Matthew Vaughn a lot. She wrote Stardust and the Kick-Ass movies and Kingsman. She's good screenwriter.
I will say, as I often do in these cases, the modern Wuthering Heights being the big exception, good stuff happens when you put women in charge.
Generally.
So
Netflix bought this. It was a Netflix original. It came out last year. I'm going to throw this out there. It seemed to get one of two reactions from most people. One reaction was nothing, because a lot of people didn't see it. And then the second reaction was negative. So when we were going into this, did I tell you that I was worried it was going to be bad?
You told me you were worried it was going to be bad, and I was worried it was going to be bad because I think historically we have had a very bad run of the most recent one, the new Emma being the big exception, but the most recent one being bad and thus having to end the podcast like on a bummer.
Mm-hmm.
It was not bad.
I mentioned at the beginning that I was going to have one or two opinions that might upset people.
Yeah.
I'm going to can I throw out both of those right now? I loved this movie.
Yeah.
I think it is fantastic. Not only that, I actually think it addresses and fixes my two biggest problems with the book.
Okay.
Which is the romance didn't really work for me.
Yeah.
And the second Mrs. De Winter kind of becomes a side character in her own story for the last quarter of the story.
Yeah. And in this one, she does not. She becomes the detective.
It is great, and I loved it. It seemed like I go on Letterboxd a lot. Letterboxd is just a place where I hang out a lot, and I'll go to a movie that we're going to do for the show, and I'll look at the reviews because it's all user reviews. This isn't like critics. These are the people on the street. This is their actual reaction.
Yes.
And it seemed like everyone's reaction was some different flavor of the same criticism, which is that Armie Hammer isn't Laurence Olivier. And as I said,
very true, he's not.
As I said before, that's an observation.
Yeah, it turns out he's a different person.
I don't think it's a valid criticism, even a little. So Armie Hammer plays Maxim De Winter, who's 34, and Lily James plays Mrs. De Winter, who's 31. So they're not even trying to do an age difference.
I don't care. It's fine.
If we only talked about that, we'd be so set against it. So like clearly the age differences are messed up. Lily James is clearly too beautiful. And she's a beautiful movie star.
Yeah.
Too beautiful to play Mrs. De Winter. It's not going to work. And she's too old. And yet...
I had to reframe it in my mind. You know, the scenes that they were in Monte Carlo together, and they were dating. They actually definitely for sure boned in Monte Carlo.
Yep.
And I had to reframe it in my mind as you know what? They have changed it. It is not a story about a rich older man being kind of predatory towards a young woman who has nothing and is alone in the world. That's not a very attractive story. They have changed it, and I am reframing this, and I am choosing to enjoy what is being put in front of me, which is a story about a romance between people who aren't necessarily equal in social status and wealth, but are at least of an age and seem to enjoy each other's company. I mean, the first note I have is he's not old enough, and then I got into it.
Yeah.
And when the proposal scene where she comes to his room and she's like, we're leaving tomorrow and I just wanted to say goodbye, because I'm not going to see you again. And he says, do you want to go to New York or do you want to come back to Manderley with me? And she says, what, as your secretary or what? And he goes, I'm asking you to marry me, you little fool. And this was the first one where I wrote down, see, that's fucking hot. It was very sexy. He managed to do it in a way that it did not feel like he was insulting her as he asked her to marry him at the same time. It felt like a cute thing that he was saying to her, and I found their chemistry enjoyable.
And it was two things really specifically in that scene that I think make that work.
Yeah.
One, he's playing it so differently than every other actor did, because every other actor was playing that scene with supreme confidence.
Yeah.
They had already made their mind up that they were going to ask her to marry them. This was the only one where he's hearing this news that they're leaving and he panics.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't want to lose you. How can I not lose you? I need to marry you, but I can't marry you. That would be crazy, but I want to. Fuck it, will you marry me?
Yeah.
He played it that way, which I think works so much better.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is, when she says, do you want a secretary? He doesn't immediately respond with, I'm asking you to marry me, you little fool.
Yeah.
He says a couple other things. Then she says yes. And then he calls her a little fool. And it's so much more charming.
Yeah.
And so much more of a term of endearment.
Yeah. And then when they go together to tell Mrs. Van Hopper, who by the way is Ann Dowd, who's terrifying.
She's amazing
Yeah.
in this. Just to bring it back to Handmaid's Tale
Yeah.
for a second, she's so good in this and so scary.
Because we were like, oh my God, what's she gonna do to her? And she's fine. But like the fact that they go together, like, and they're like kind of making out outside, like, they just had such amazing chemistry. You really believed in them as a couple. Like
we did, at least.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't. I read so many reviews that talk about them having no chemistry. I don't know what movie they were watching.
I don't know what movie they were watching. And like maybe they were watching the Charles Dance one by accident. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. I mean, the again, like the proposal scene was where I bought into it.
Yeah.
I think my notes before that are kind of negative because I hadn't quite bought into it yet. Like there's a scene where they're like hanging out on the beach and he does the thing where you like put sand in like a shape on someone's back so like they get a tan around it, so then when like the sand, you've done that, right? Like the sand washes off and like there's a design, and I think it's an M for Maxim. It reminded me of the like, what is it, the sex cult. I was like, he branded her like
an XIVM.
Yeah, I was like, is this supposed to be sexy? But anyway, then I bought into it, so I didn't feel bad.
Can I call out the observation you made to me while we were watching this?
Sure.
This was the one that made me challenge my assumptions.
Yes.
You brought up something that I thought made a lot of sense and has changed my mind about this, which is something we talk about all the time, which is when you're adapting, what's important? What's actually important? I'm going to go ahead and say that the truly important things about this book are they are in an imbalanced relationship that makes her feel like she is always competing with his dead wife and she'll never live up to her and he's never going to love her as much as he loved her.
Yeah.
But then it turns out he murdered her.
Yes.
And that's a giant change, and she's got all of this like, oh, I don't want you to be arrested and hang for it, but also you do love me.
And also we're partners now.
Right? That's complicated. None of that requires a 20-year age difference.
No.
And if what you're looking for as a viewer, if you love Rebecca and you're watching this and going, there's no age difference, so that's bullshit, I would just challenge you to say maybe that expectation is a superficial expectation and doesn't actually have much to do with the crux of the story.
Yeah, and I would even go so far as to say I think that big of an age difference in 2021.
This was the thing you said that I was setting you up for.
For a modern audience, makes the character and again, this may be my bias, makes the character by definition unsympathetic and gross. And just think about Charles Dance, right?
Yeah.
You might not be able to do it and still retain your audience. There are things, and you know, we've talked about this before, like there are things you sometimes need to do with period pieces that don't necessarily stick to the letter of the plot, but you have to make a change because something about the original text is not going to be sympathetic for your audience because times have moved on and changed.
Can I throw out an example of this? How many stories have we read where two characters end up getting together at the end who are first cousins?
Yes.
And
many.
We as an audience are expected to be in favor of that.
Yes.
That doesn't work now.
Yeah.
Like if you told a modern story where the two characters get together and they are actual first cousins, it's icky.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. It's not going to make you feel the same way because we're a modern audience watching something that's in a modern day. This isn't placed in the modern day, but it's made for a modern audience.
Exactly. Oh, exactly. And, you know, even getting, you know, deeper into more important themes, like imagine something being set in a time that there was a component of racism or even slavery or something like that you as the filmmaker weren't looking at through a critical eye and were just like, well, it's the way it was, so I'm just going to depict it. Like that's not interesting. Like has the benefit of not being interesting, but also like not sympathetic. Like we can't sympathize with a character that has viewpoints that are horrific because we can't. Like that's not. Hopefully we can't. You know, it's not socially responsible filmmaking.
Yeah.
Right. So you know what? I'm fully on the side of this. Yeah. And if you don't mind me continuing to mention a couple of other things, I just thought the writing in this in general was very, very smart. I think it knew when to spend time with things and like spend some time with these characters, like the part where they're kind of getting to know each other. Like we see all these different little dates that they go on as all these little conversations they have as they get to know each other. And then the things that can be compressed were compressed. And I'm going to give you an example.
Yep.
On like one of her very first days at Manderley, she accidentally breaks this like expensive, sculpture, a Cupid, and she panics and she hides the pieces. And then later, Mrs. Danvers accuses one of the younger servants of stealing it, and they have to sort of have it all out that she broke it. In the original and in every version where we see this, Frith comes in. Mrs. Danvers is upset with one of the servants, and sir, and you need to kind of resolve this dispute.
One of the servants. You mean Robert.
Robert.
Say his name.
Yeah, you say his name. Robert
Poor
the
Robert,
servant.
who cries in every version.
Yeah. Maxim is like, oh, this is so annoying. I have to deal with this. Frith goes away. Mrs. De Winter says, oh, dear Maxim, I'm so sorry. I forgot to mention it. I was the one that broke the ornament. Why didn't you say so when Frith was here? I don't know. I panicked. I don't know. Frith and Mrs. Danvers comes back. They have to explain it again. Oh, I'm so sorry. She was the one who broke the ornament. Then they have to call Mrs. Danvers in. Oh, Mrs. Danvers. Then they have to have a scene about how, maybe next time you'll tell me. It's like we have to have the same thing explained like 3 or maybe even 4 times, right? But in this, they've compressed it all together. So everyone's in the room together. Robert's there. He's crying. Mrs. Danvers is there. She's accusing him of breaking the thing. I'm so sorry. And I don't think it even.
She tells them
all about it.
She tells them all that she did it, and she's so embarrassed because it's in front of Maxim and Frith and Robert and Mrs. Danvers. The awkwardness of the scene is still there. It's still horribly affecting for her because she's so embarrassed about it. The fact that it's one scene doesn't take that away.
Yeah, but you only have to have one conversation one time instead of 3 or 4, and it really is smart. Hopefully it was not just like a coincidence that they're trying to cut stuff, because I thought they did it in a really smart way.
I thought so too. Like a couple other little things. One, meeting Beatrice and Granny was the same scene.
Yes. Yeah. Perfect. Fine.
It was great.
Why not?
Worked perfectly. There's no reason that those have to be different scenes. It was one scene and it worked really, really well.
Yeah.
Here's a moment of smart writing that I loved. She goes down to Rebecca's cottage for the first time. And the entire time she's running down there, because she's running after Jasper, she's worried he's going to get hurt. And Maxim is yelling like, don't go down there. He's fine. God fucking damn it. Blah, 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 blah. And it never really comes up. Like, she does figure out why he was mad that she was going down there, but they never talk about it. And it's just this kind of slow burn thing throughout that just kind of doesn't really go anywhere. In this one, she's on the beach and she walks out of the cabin. She goes, I know why you didn't want me to come down here. This was Rebecca's, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's great. There's no reason that shouldn't just be out in the open.
It was like, it's like, oh, she wonders about it. And then Frank tells her, and then she's silent about it. And then it's like, oh, just talk about it. It's okay. It's not that important.
I feel like there are 2 big things we need to talk about that we haven't mentioned yet.
Yeah.
I kind of mentioned before a little bit, one of them. One, we haven't even mentioned Kristen Scott Thomas as Mrs. Danvers.
Yeah.
And I think I know why.
Why?
She's fantastic, but did you doubt that she would be fantastic before you saw it?
No.
Neither did I.
Yeah.
She absolutely met my expectations. I expected her to be brilliant, and she was, which makes it kind of not exciting.
Yeah.
When someone I expect to be wonderful is wonderful, it's kind of, that's good.
There's a scene that I think was maybe a direct tribute to Gosford Park, like when the scene where Kristen Scott Thomas comes down into the servants' hall and they all like stop eating and stand up. The exact same thing happens, that Lily James comes down and like all the servants stop eating and stand up, but she just needs to talk to the housekeeper, and it's very similar. So I wonder if it was a Gosford Park reference.
I got no problem with them referencing Gosford Park.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that is worth mentioning. She's wonderful, and I think she's my favorite version of Mrs. Danvers, but like, I'm not shocked that she is.
Yeah.
The second thing, we got to talk about the whole 4th act.
Yeah.
I'm always looking at IMDb when we're watching these to see like who's playing characters, and we hadn't even gotten there yet. And I said to you, like, sweetie, I don't think Colonel Julian is in this at all.
Yeah.
I mentioned that my big epiphany was Colonel Julian's got to be a big movie star. It's got to be like Judi Dench in Shakespeare in Love, like someone who's going to fucking come in and own it and win an Oscar for Best Supporting, even though they're only in 10 minutes of the movie, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Julian doesn't need to be there.
Yeah, she just does it herself. It's kind of brilliant. She like finds the doctor and she finds the files and she
let's
talks
be clear,
to the police.
The situation is much worse for Maxim in this version than in the other ones.
Yeah, he's in jail.
He's in jail the whole time. It isn't one of those things where he and Julian are going about solving everything and she's just tagging along. Maxim is in jail. He is gonna go down for this. The stakes are so much higher, and she is trying to save him because she loves him.
Yes.
And it makes it so much better. And she finds out who Dr. Baker is before anybody else does. And she goes and finds him and finds like the file about Rebecca.
Yes.
Like she's there and she's present and she's active. And it did everything that I wanted in the book.
Yeah.
And I loved it.
Yeah.
The last quarter of this movie cemented how much I loved it.
Yeah, and I think so they changed the ending a little bit too,
Yeah.
and I was so happy with it, and I think they really earned this change because the first 90% of the movie was so enjoyable, and we just wanted these crazy kids to get together. So like the way that the traditional I won't even say the book, because the book doesn't end this way, but like the traditional version ends is
you can say that the Hitchcock version is the traditional version because it is the accepted version.
It's like we live together, it's now 10 years later, and we'll never have any children, and our lives have sort of been ruined, but at least we have each other as we flit from place to place, never really knowing a home in this weird world that we've created for ourselves. And in this one, it starts off that way. It's like, last night I dreamed I went to Manderley again, and everything was very terrible and bad, and blah 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 blah. And then it goes, and then I woke up, and I was here with my hot husband, and we were having a bunch of sex, and
we're somewhere cool, like Cairo
we're
or
somewhere
something.
cool in Cairo because we have a lot of money as we roam around the world for years and years trying to decide where we want to live, because we could just go anywhere, and we're so excited and happy. This is great. The end. Like, I kind of loved it. Like, I felt like it was earned. I felt like it was deserved. I feel like if they had made that change in a version that I hadn't liked, I would have been like, this is bullshit. But I loved it.
Yeah.
I thought it was great. It was a nice note to end on after doing all that, Rebecca.
Can I run through a couple quick things?
Yeah.
Like, this did the ball scene my favorite way. This one, more than any of them, felt like she just comes down so happy. She's not acting like this is this big dramatic thing. She's treating it like, oh, I'm doing a fun thing that he's going to laugh at.
Yeah.
And then the air is absolutely sucked out of the room. It was my favorite version of that. And that to me is like the canary in the coal mine. If that scene doesn't work, I don't know that I'm going to love the version.
Yeah.
But the scene worked, and it was great. It was really visceral in a lot of ways. One of the things that the book is I didn't even mention this, but one of the things I responded to so much in the book is how vivid her imagination is.
Yeah.
And how much she puts herself into situations. This one really showed the inside of her head in ways that other ones didn't.
Yeah.
That I really appreciated.
I noticed that about the book too, that she sort of thinks through like what might happen in a given scenario. She's kind of like, and I pictured this happening and this happening and this happening, and then this would happen and this would happen, and then I came back to reality and none of that had happened. Like she does it a lot.
Yeah. Oh, here's another thing that they do that's so good. Mrs. Danvers is so evil. She never tells her that you should dress up as Caroline de Winter.
Yeah.
Because that whole thing I said about how her plan was a gamble.
Yeah.
In this one, her plan is so much better because she gets Clarice, the like young maid that becomes Mrs. de Winter's maid.
Yes.
She tells her, you tell her to be Caroline de Winter and don't tell her it was me.
Yeah.
That's a good plan. That's a much better plan. And it made it so much more evil because the night that everything happens and everything goes down, it's not just Mrs. de Winter that feels terrible for making Max feel awful. Clarice feels terrible for telling her to do the thing because she didn't know, because she didn't work there when Rebecca was there.
Yeah.
It makes her so much more evil because Clarice is this innocent character. I loved it. And then the other thing that's really nice is that in other versions, I'm going to mention two quick things. One, at the very beginning, when she's saying, last night I dreamt of Manderley, and she's talking to somebody, but we don't know who she's talking to. It's kind of ambiguous. And she says, when I went to Manderley and I met you for the first time. And we see really quickly two shots, one of Maxim and one of Mrs. Danvers. And I loved it. That's ambiguity presented with clarity. That's just good old-fashioned, I'm going to give you something ambiguous. It's going to make you think one of two things is happening, and it's fun to think that it's one of those two things. Then at the end, so they're setting up the idea that her relationship with Danvers is almost as important as her relationship with Maxim. She and Danvers get that big scene at the end down on the coast.
Yeah.
Because Danvers' whole thing is, I'm going to salt the earth. I'm going to burn down Manderley, and I'm going to burn down Rebecca's
And I'm going to jump
cottage,
off a fucking
and
cliff.
I'm going to jump off the cliff into the ocean.
Yeah.
But she gets this great scene that's just these two women talking. It's just two women talking about another woman. And yeah, they're mentioning a man, but that's not even really the thing that's most important to Danvers at that point. And Danvers throws herself off into the ocean, and it just worked really well. And then we get that epilogue.
Yeah.
Every change they made was one that I was either fine with or loved. They didn't change anything that I didn't like.
Yeah.
It's good.
It's good.
It's real good.
Yeah. You want to do the quadrants?
Yeah, let's do these quadrants. So let's go back to 1940. Do you think they cared about the source material?
No.
No, you don't think so?
No.
I bet they loved it.
You
It
think
was
so?
because it was such a popular book. It
Yeah,
was like
yeah, that makes
popular
sense.
romantic mystery kind of thing. I bet it was the kind of thing that they were like people were into.
Sure.
You know?
All
I bet
right. When
everyone
you put it that way, I guess
everyone had
so.
a copy of it in their bathroom.
Sure,
You know,
of course
that kind
they
of thing. I bet was it successful?
Yeah.
Of course it was. It's so good. 1979 miniseries. Do you think they cared about the source material?
Honestly, I find it hard to. For whatever reason, I find it hard to say. I think so. They must have.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a very loving adaptation, and it's a very thorough adaptation.
I think for me, like, my assumption is always that they cared unless they do something that I'm like, you did not understand this material at all. Like, for me, that's the barometer for whether they cared or not. And I think they did.
I think they did
so I'm
too.
going to say yes.
Also, I'll say I think Anna Massey like stepped off the page.
Oh, she's so good. Yeah.
Her casting was so book accurate.
yeah.
I feel like they cared.
And I forgot to mention, like, they even like made her up clearly to make her look like she had like skull's eyes. Like, they put a lot of like dark shadow around her eyes. It worked really well.
1997 miniseries. Do you think they cared about the source material?
I don't know. Maybe.
It didn't strike me that they did.
I mean, maybe they cared about the Hitchcock film. I really don't know. Like,
yeah.
this would be the one that I say they cared the least because of all these weird scenes that they injected that did make me think like, I don't know, what are they trying to do?
I just don't think they got it.
Yeah,
and
I
it
don't
wasn't
think they got
successful.
it wasn't successful.
Like, not 100% unsuccessful, but it wasn't successful. 2020 movie. Do you think they cared about the source material?
Yeah, I think so.
I think Jane Goldman cared.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
she really cared. And I also am given to understand that Ben Wheatley loves the book.
Yeah.
And the Hitchcock version.
Yeah.
But like I feel like he was really backed into a corner on this one because how do you remake a Hitchcock movie?
Yeah.
And I think this is worth mentioning too. The other time we did Hitchcock, we did Dial M for Murder. I loved A Perfect Murder.
It was good.
I thought it was super fun. I don't think Hitchcock is one of those filmmakers that's like above being remade.
Yeah.
And you can make super fun movies based on his.
Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, 2020 movie. I think they cared about the source material. Was it successful?
Yes.
Clearly, we thought it was. Well, this has been. I hope you're all still with us. I hope we didn't upset anybody.
I'm sure it's fine.
That we loved a thing that people don't like. This has been Adapt or Perish. If you'd like to find us online, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at AdaptCast. You can join our groups on Facebook and Goodreads, and you can also find and follow me on Letterboxd. If you have anything to say that's longer than a tweet, you can always send an email to adaptorperishcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the show, there are 3 great ways you can do it. First, tell a friend. Second, a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice would be greatly appreciated. Just so you know, if you review us, like we read those. We read every single one of them.
We don't get so many reviews that we don't read them.
Yeah. Third, we are on Patreon. This show will always be free, but if you become a patron, you can get access to Adapt or Perish Plus, our bonus show that releases every other week between episodes of this show, and our patron-only Slack community. It's been a lot of fun, and all the details are at patreon.com/adaptcast.
We are happy, aren't we, Maxim? Terribly happy.
I have something very bad to tell you.
We're not terribly happy.
No, I did a murder.
Okay.
I killed a lady.
Here's what we're gonna do.
Bye, everybody.